Okay, one of the things you have to do prior to tearing something down is basically clean it, and that's called decommissioning. So that's just basically, this particular photo here is a project where we took down an air separation plant for a industrial gas manufacturing complex in Texas. And we found ourselves tasked with removing several thousand cubic yards of perlite and vermiculite insulation. Now, using the principles of investment recovery, we were able to find a home for that material and save the owner in excess of $1 million for transportation and disposal costs. Okay, now this is one of the types of demolition. It's controlled blasting. Now it only comprises a small percentage of the actual type of demolition work, but it's also very, very safe to do if you do it correctly. And sometimes controlled blasting is the best route to go, but it only takes up a very, very small percentage of the actual content of demolition projects. Then you have mechanical demolition, which is widely used and has fewer man-hours exposed to the hazards. And while shears and processors and things of that nature are the best things since pockets on a shirt, they can't replace the cutting torch as the staple of the demolition industry. Experienced demolition burners, and some people call them demolition techs, high burners, they call them by a multitude of different names. But they use terms like set cut, drop cut, fish mouth. They use terms, hinge cuts. They use terms that can make a 3,000-ton structure come apart like an erector set. And demolition burners, it takes a long time to train them. It takes a lot of experience, but they're worth their weight in gold when you do have good demolition burners. Then you have dismantling. And dismantling is basically taking things apart with cranes. And you either downsize them using saws, unbolt, you can use cutting torches or so forth, whatever it takes to basically break it apart into manageable sections that you can lift down with cranes. That's called dismantling. Now, it has more man-hours exposed to the hazards, and a well-thought-out lift plan is extremely important, and there's specific criteria that you have to be concerned about in regards to making crane lifts on demolition projects. And we'll go over that a little bit more later. So here's some of the tools of the trade. The grapple, the universal processor, the shear, pneumatic breakers, and hydraulic hammers. I've always been, as a kid, I was always a fan, I still am now as far as that goes, dinosaurs. And these kind of appear like dinosaurs, out there is eating these structures up. There's one contractor in Texas that actually painted a dinosaur head on the end of one of them. And everybody brought him in just so that they could have their dinosaur eating up their structure. So, one thing is that you notice that on the cabs, there's a cage around the cab to protect the operators. Now, that's really important. If anybody ever shows up with a piece of demolition equipment and it does not have a cage to protect that operator, stop them. Don't let them work. Because while these machines make taking apart a multi-thousand-ton structure look like just short work with no problem whatsoever, all it takes is just one piece of concrete, one piece of steel the size of your fist to kill somebody. So that's why you give these folks a wide berth, these operators. Now, you get people that talk about, they're scared to death to be shot at. A bullet's that big. If you take a shear and you cut into something, and a bolt the size of my hand pops out and flies 40 feet, that's going to do more damage than any bullet possibly could. So give them a wide berth. So here's some of the other tools. A skid steer loader, a man lift, a crane, and a demolition cutting torch. Now, skid steers are the handiest things on demolition projects, and whenever I'm reviewing a demolition bid and the contractor does not have skid steer loaders on there, then there's something wrong with it. You need those. They have all kinds of attachments, and they're very versatile, and they're very, very handy to use on the different projects. Now, then there's a 3-foot cutting torch. Now, if you have a contractor show up with a little 1-foot shop torch and start cutting, then have pause and back off, and have them back off. One of the things, the 3-foot torch or longer is an engineering control as well as a safety mechanism. Number one, it allows the burner, the torch cutter, to stay out of the fumes. Now, we're all concerned about lead-based paint fumes, but when you think about it, and we have any scrap guys out here? Any scrap dealers? Yeah, we got several out here. They'll be able to tell you that those fumes don't just have lead-based paint, in the fumes. They've got all the other metals that make up that steel. They've got, chrome and manganese and zinc and everything else. So you need to make sure you keep your head out of the fumes and always wear a respirator and have medical surveillance if you've got somebody using a torch. And also the 3-foot torch are longer. So many torches are 6 and 7 feet long. It allows you to keep away from the hazard in case something pops. Demolition versus construction. If you can't measure it, then you can't manage it. You really need to make sure you can measure it, but make sure you're using an effective measurement tool. So many owners and also many agencies use construction metrics to gauge demolition projects and contractors, and that doesn't necessarily work because there's a major difference and it's an entirely different animal than construction. Modern demolition crews are mostly mechanized, so there's fewer man-hours exposed to the hazards. Also, the demolition crews are smaller, and you're dealing with more hazards. Because you don't have as many man-hours to dilute the total recordable incident rate and your experience modification rate and the other formulas that you're concerned with, one recordable incident will blow you completely out of the water if you're being compared to construction standards. So it's very important that you use an effective measurement tool when gauging the effectiveness and the capabilities and competence of a demolition contractor. There are few formal classes to learn demolition work, and mentoring becomes a way of life and more the norm than the exception. Demolition contractors must be more diversified, and management of change takes on an entirely new meaning because it's implemented in reverse in a skyline that changes by the hour. Many demolition contractors are short-term in duration. Many demolition contracts and projects are short-term in duration. And accurate drawings are a rarity. And I've got an example here where I'll show you where, even when drawings are available, chances are they may not be accurate. Craning rigging is more flexible in demolition, but it has more hazardous considerations. And I'll go over that a little bit more also in a minute. And there are more unknowns in demolition, both above ground and below ground, especially your older facilities. Now, here's some of the challenges on demolition projects. Non-standard rigging. Now, this particular lift right here, we had 2 engineers run weights on this particular lift. We were at 60% of the chart of the crane. And so we knew we were okay. We went by the drawings. We made it cut. We tried coming up, and it would not come up. So we double-checked our weights, double-checked, made sure it was cut. It still would not come up. An old-timer that had been there for about 30 or 40 years came up and said, about 20 years ago, we opened that column up and we installed a water tank on the inside, and that water tank may still be there. And he says, I don't know if it's on your drawings or not. So we cut a little coupon in the side, we looked on the inside, and sure enough, there's a water tank. So what we did is we went ahead and had to cut an entire section out and then drain the water and then remove that tank so that we could complete the lift. Now, a lot of times on demolition crane lifts, once you have it, it's yours. So in this particular case here, we felt very, very, very comfortable that we weren't going to have an incident because we could set the load back down, but we felt very comfortable with the weights. So now also other challenges. Fall protection. You're taking everything down, so what are you going to tie off to? So that's a good question. Uncharted asbestos, lead-based paint, universal waste. You need to have a competent person on site that is capable of recognizing the potential of hazardous materials that was missed in the survey. So, and if you're dealing with asbestos, the requirement to have a competent person on site in accordance to certain standards is required. Hot work. Know what to look out for, and so you don't blow yourself or the plant up. So that's really important. Unauthorized access to the work area. So have barricades, both hard and soft, around the work area, as well as have sign-in and sign-out sheets. Now, one of the things that's mentioned in my bio is that I'm a professional safety source approved by the Texas Workers' Compensation Commission in the SIC code of wrecking and demolition. I've had to investigate a lot of accidents and that weren't on any of my jobs. But the worst accident I've ever had on one of my jobs involved a broken back. We had an area barricaded off, and everybody broke for lunch. One of the workers went inside the barricaded area and decided to take a nap. Everybody came back to work. They didn't know they was in there. And this happened in 1986, and the gentleman's name was Pedro Molinas. Somebody dropped a beam across his back, and he's a paraplegic now. So, I mean, he has been for decades. And so, things like that, you need to make sure that you have the areas barricaded off and have sign-in and sign-out sheets and keep control of the work site. One of the things that we should have done on that job is make sure that we swept the area and made sure there wasn't anybody in there prior to starting work again. Especially on projects where people are working at heights, it's very simple. If you're not under something, it's not going to fall on you. If you're up in the air and somebody's under you and you just kick a bolt off the side, then basically, if nobody's under you, it's not going to hit them. If somebody is under you, it's going to hit them. So, you need to be aware of what's over your head and what's under your head at all times. Stray electrical. Now, I'll go over it in another slide, just a couple of seconds here, but one of the things is that the structure may have all the electricity locked out and tagged out, but somebody might have run a stray line off the grid 30 years ago. So anytime you go into a demolition project, treat all electrical as if it's alive until you do verify otherwise. Structural fatigue of walkways and ladders. Will they sustain your own weight? That's something that I know there was a major accident that killed some people over in the UK in regards to workers that were walking on a catwalk and the catwalk fell. So don't assume that it's going to that a ladder will sustain your weight or a walkway will sustain your weight. Are they safe to tie off to? If you're up there working on a catwalk, make sure they're safe to tie off to. Will they sustain themselves during a lift? Now, one of the things contractors, when they're actually making lifts, they'll cut shackle holes in the side of the columns, and they'll hook into those. Now, make sure that those shackle holes and the metal in those columns are capable of sustaining themselves when you make that lift, because it's not new. But that is a proven method. It is a good way to actually make the lifts, is cutting the shackle holes. Poor training and mentoring of workers. It's important that even workers that are certified are mentored in with experienced demolition personnel. You can have a certified crane operator, I think it's NCCO certified crane operator, that has absolutely no demolition experience. So just requiring that somebody has NCCO certification in cranes, for example, doesn't mean that they know the nuances and the hazards associated with demolition. So make sure that you do provide a mentoring program to that effect. Failure to make the workers aware of the big picture. Now, it's much easier for somebody to exercise stop work authority in the event of a perceived breach in safety if they know what's going on around them. If you've got a person sitting there with a shovel and that person is looking at somebody with a cutting torch 50, 60 feet away from them, if they don't know what that person is doing, then how can they exercise stop work authority? So make them aware of the big picture. Very important. So even when somebody tells you that a process system is clean, you need to learn to verify it. Now, in this particular case here, this was actually a photo. The owner told me this system was clean, but you look at it, it's not open. The exchangers, the heads are still on them. The tanks, the heads are still on them. There's low-lying areas, there's valves, there's manifolds. And as Fred had mentioned a while ago, there could be trapped product kept in here. Now, another accident, and I'll share a few accidents with you that I've had to investigate. And to tell you the truth, I'd much rather prevent an accident than to investigate one. I mean, and just for obvious reasons, But in this particular case, in this particular accident, it involved an oil refinery in Texas. A demolition contractor was taking down a tower that had a big pipe that came down. It was like 100 foot tall. Workers had been cutting on that pipe all day long without any kind of problems. They were making their very last cut before the end of the day, and there was a valve. That valve was closed. And so the workers cut on the other side of the valve, management had changed, things changed. They didn't implement any type of change procedure, and they didn't recognize the fact that, hey, that closed valve might mean something. There was trapped product on the other side of the valve. The pipe exploded, killed the torch cutter automatically, and also it just about blew the head off of the man lift, and it seriously injured the other worker. So make sure you verify that something is dead and something does not have any type of product or any type of explosive vapors or explosive product in it prior to cutting on it. Again, stray electrical, always make sure that you verify and verify and verify again. This probably causes more incidents and accidents on demolition projects than fall protection, than people that fall. So this is something you need to verify, that the power is locked out and tagged out and somebody did not run an independent line off the grid 30 years ago. Fall protection. Make sure what you tie off to is more than adequate. Do not cut yourself or your coworkers down. Now, if you see cutters up in the structure and they've got cutting torches and they're just cutting away, make sure you've got someone out there monitoring them, because it's very, very common that one person might cut the other person down. The cutters are usually very, very well trained before they're put into that position, but always be aware that people do get complacent. Use lifelines whenever necessary, and have a 100% tie-off rule in effect, especially when you're in heights. If you're tied off, you're not going to fall. Watch for holes in the floor. And if you're taking down a structure and you lift a column out from the structure and you leave a big hole in the floor, cover that hole up. And also, if you take away handrails, make sure that you cover those handrails up and properly barricade it, because you know the people that you're working with during the day. But if it's an operating facility at night, somebody goes up there in the middle of the night, it might be a security guard, and walks, and all of a sudden, bam, they go down through the hole. And if anybody has ever walked and expected to find solid footing right in front of them, and all of a sudden there was nothing there, that's a very, very sick feeling. And I've done it before, but luckily I wasn't hurt. It's a very sick feeling. So make sure you properly barricade the areas. And now also too, when you're walking around on these old structures and somebody puts you see some plywood or some paper, don't assume that, hey, it's solid material and solid metal underneath that paper, underneath that plywood. That might be something rotten. So you step on it, you go through. So you have to think about these type of things whenever you're walking these old structures. Now, we all concern ourselves with bidders that basically the contractors are actually performing the work, and ourselves. But one of the things is that we don't think about is the fact that when we have bid walks, you have contractors going out there before the JHAs, before the JSAs, before all the work plans are put in place. And basically what happens is that you're just having to go through there and make sure that nobody gets hurt. So, you do your JSAs and things like that prior to having bid walks, and a lot of people overlook that, but that's something I'd like to mention. Be aware of where you're at all times, situational awareness, and always have an escape route. Now, here in this room, if the room catches fire, then we got an exit there, we got an exit there. If we have an active shooter, then hey, we got an escape route. Everybody start throwing things or just whatever your training is. Now, anybody on demolition projects, especially when you're older plants, need to have an escape route in everything they're doing. Another accident I had to investigate was about 10 years ago. An excavator operator was in the process of pulling over a structure that weighed 300 tons. He had an excavator and had a cable tied off the structure, had two cutters up inside the structure that were basically weakening the structure, making it ready to pull over. The operator thought that the cutters were taking too much time to finish their cuts, so he got out of the excavator, he walked up into the structure, and when he did, the structure prematurely collapsed, fell on top of him, and crushed him. Now, the two cutters and the foreman had escape routes, so they weren't hurt. Everything should go as planned, and you like Fred said, you design a plan and then you work that plan. But on demolition projects, you got to really be concerned with the fact that good things on demolition projects, after a while, it looks like paint drying. But bad things, when they happen, they're usually catastrophic, and they're usually, are something that's going to make the newspapers. And so make sure that you do manage change, and make sure that you do use lessons learned to make sure nobody gets hurt. So this is one of my favorites. This is an accident that I actually had to investigate. And so how can a can of spray paint cause a fatality or an injury? Well, this one didn't actually cause a fatality, but it caused an injury. And especially in working in an operating plant, and you have to mark the items that are going to remain and then mark the items that are going to come out. A lot of people use generic colors like green and red. Green means it's going to come out, red means it's going to stay, or vice versa. But now, Make sure you keep tight control of those paint cans, because at night, or maybe even the workers go up and paint green over red or red over green, and then somebody goes up and thinks that that particular item is is dead, and it turns out it's live. They cut into it, then you're going to have an incident. So keep tight control of the paint cans. Now, another thing, instead of using generic red and green, use hard to find colors like fluorescent hot pink or fluorescent orange or something like that, to mark your units. One of my pet peeves is failure of a company to provide an opportunity for 360-degree feedback from everybody in the field. So no one wants to get hurt, and nobody wants to get anybody else hurt. So creating a proactive situation that promotes 360-degree feedback is one way, because you've got enough brain power out there to stop any accident from happening. So by putting in a program in place that you tap into that brain power, you're going to create a much, much safer work environment. What to look for in a quality demolition company. So choosing the right demolition company, again, is very, very important. And a lot of this stuff, I think Fred may have already went over some of it, but I'm going to touch on it just from a little bit different flavor, I think. What do you look for in a top-notch demolition company? One is a great safety record. Make sure that when you look at their safety stats, you verify those stats. A lot of people use IS Networld, PEC reporting, and a lot of these different companies that pre-qualify contractors, but junk in and junk out when it comes to safety. So, something as simple as just running a web search on a particular contractor before you hire them to find out if there's anything that didn't show up, that should have shown up on their safety stats. Employee retention. How long has key employees been with the project? And also, do they understand the HSE program, or is it just a fat book on the shelf drawing dust? Financial stability, bonding capacity, experience on similar projects in similar industries. Experience to effectively use investment recovery to help offset costs. Now, a lot of companies, they have a playbook. They let the demolition contractor tell them how much value is out there, what it's going to cost to remove it, what your net cost is going to be. I've got another slide on this I'll go over in just a second, but that equates to asking somebody to hold your wallet without knowing how much money you had in it to begin with. You really need to have a good handle on the value of what you have on your demolition project prior to going out for bids. If you don't, then you're basically at the mercy of the contractors. Commitment of management and length of time in business. Also, if a contractor cannot explain their plan, how they plan on accomplishing something, then chances are they can't do it. So that's why every contractor needs a site-specific health and safety plan and a site-specific technical work plan on every single project. And every worker should understand that plan and sign off on it prior to being allowed on the project. And every worker should have the right to stop work in the event a perceived safety hazard exists. And remember, it's all about the people. You could have a great demolition company that's great on paper, but they could have a sorry crew. You could have a mediocre demolition company that has a great crew. So learn to evaluate the entire package, not just the contractor itself, but the crew they're going to put on your project. Site-specific plan should be concise and linked and tied into a master plan. Now, the corporate health and safety manual is great, but there's no way you're going to implement a 600-page plan on a demolition project. So you need to be concise and be more concerned about getting the message across. You can reference it back to the health and safety manual, but you need to be concise. A 30, 40-page plan should be sufficient in making sure that you get the point across to the workers actually doing the work. Be in addition to the corporate safety manual, and be flexible. One of the things that I see a lot of folks put together the plan, but then they basically just bring the crew in and they don't get input from them. So be flexible and promote input from the crews, and don't make that plan resistant to change. The plan should be relevant and effective, include behavioral-based safety observation and work components. It should educate every worker on the entire scope of the project and not just their small part, as I mentioned a while ago. Explain the hazards and mitigation measures prior to the worker being exposed to the hazards. That's important. So these are some of the elements of a technical work plan. And a resource-loaded schedule, Fred talked about that a while ago. Now, there's ways that you can evaluate a schedule and basically help yourself prevent change orders or recognize potential change orders. Key contact personnel, including after-hour contact information, average crew size, hospital, landfill, and scrapyard to be utilized, waste management, Fred's already talked about that, and also third-party waste stewardship standards. Now, out there on the job site, everybody's wearing respirators, they've got their PPE, they've got protocol they're following, they've got a written plan. You need to make sure that when you send that material off-site to a landfill or you send it off-site to a recycling facility, that they're employing that same degree of quality assurance that you have on that job site. Because, regardless of what your contract says, if you send a piece of material, that pipe that has 2 blind flanges and full of product and somebody cuts into it, they're going to come back to you. It's going to come back to you. So make sure that third-party waste stewardship audits are done prior to you sending materials out to landfills or scrapyards. Approximate total number of man-hours per area. And here's some other things. Major equipment and quantity to be used, subcontractors to be used, community and stakeholder awareness programs. Touch on that very briefly. Now, on the big fluid catalytic cracking unit where I showed you being dropped by controlled explosives, that was taking down an entire oil refinery. And there was community living all around that oil refinery. So basically what we had to do, and they were upset, number one, because the oil refinery was coming down, and number two, they were having all kinds of big trucks coming up and down the road. So we had to come up with a community engagement plan. Basically, where we let the community know what was going on. We showed them videos. Here's what to expect. We've got these big things that look like dinosaurs that's going to be knocking these structures over. And we let them know what to expect. But also we gave them a contact information saying, look, you contact this person if you have a question, you have a concern, because that way they don't go to the authorities, they don't go to the newspapers. They'll come to that one person. But the one thing that we did that was probably one of the best things is come up with a one-page newsletter each and every week saying, here's what to expect this coming week. So a community engagement plan. Now also stakeholder engagement plans. You have the owners. Make sure as contractors that you explain to the owners what the game plan is and stick to that plan. And if you vary from that plan, then basically come back to them and let them know and let them approve it before. And most of them will do that anyway. Crisis management. Again, good things happen, very slow but bad things, when they do happen, you need to have a crisis management element. Estimated quantities of each type of materials to be removed on the project, and method statements for completing the most hazardous tasks. And this is one thing that most site-specific plans lack, is method statements. Whenever you take something down, you're taking down a unit, one of the first things you need to do is decide which of the tasks are the most hazardous, and then come up with a method statement that's a little bit more detailed of how you plan on addressing and mitigating those hazards and taking that particular item down safely. That's something, method statements are something that's very common, and I think it's very, very important to be implemented in the site-specific plan. So, and again, it's more of the same. You'll get a copy of this. I'm not going to read the entire slide to you, but one of the things that I will mention is that make sure that the contractors put enough effort in not just a whole bunch of cut and paste. Make sure they put enough effort in designing a site-specific technical work plan and a site-specific health and safety plan. These are some of the elements of a health and safety plan, some of the chapters that you might want to see, in your project. And this is some other ones. Give you a chance to read them. So if there's any specific comments I want to make on them. Okay, there'll be one more. Now on this one here, one thing I'd like to mention is, and again, third-party waste stewardship standards. Now, you might find redundant chapters between the health and safety plan, site-specific, as well as the technical work plan. One of them is meant to be technical, and the other one is meant to be referencing and addressing health and safety concerns. So it may be the same chapter, same title, but it's going to be a little bit different. But stormwater pollution prevention plans, if your site is over 5 acres, I believe that's correct. Is that Fred? Is it over 5 acres? 1 acre? Okay, if your site's over 1 acre, you need to have a stormwater pollution prevention plan in place. And also, one thing that's not listed here is medical surveillance on employees. Now, on lead-based paint, for instance, if an employee has high blood lead levels, or a worker has high blood lead levels before coming onto your site, and they're doing something that they're exposed to lead-based paint, number one, they could get that past that trigger so that the body is not getting rid of the lead. It could cause some serious health concerns. But also, the fact is, that you have to be concerned about is that if they show up with high blood lead levels after they come on your job site, then basically they're yours. I mean, it's up to you to prove that they did not have that high blood lead level prior to coming on the site. That's why it's a very, very good practice to make sure that your demolition contractor that you select provides you with pre-employment and not pre-employment necessarily, but pre-project and post-project blood lead levels so that you know that hazard did not come from you. Because a lot of times in this industry, it's just as important to prove what you did as well as what you did not do. So pre-project and post-project blood lead level tests is very important. Behavioral-based safety. It's also paramount to the success of a project, and there's a lot of definitions of BBS, and this one I'd like to use here is the study of human behavior as it relates to the performance of tasks on a demolition project. Requiring workers to submit and also adhere to BBS observations to develop a positive trend to positively influence an effective blend of worker attitude and worker behavior is a great practice. A good BBS program is also proven to prevent accidents by predicting the future from metrics from the past. And I can give you all kinds of examples of that, but I won't do it just right now. Also, most demolition projects are short in duration, or many are short in duration. So the short duration in a skyline that changes by the hour makes management of change, again, in entirely different, puts it into an entirely different dimension. So, this presentation would not be complete without talking about the investment recovery conference without addressing the impact that asset recovery or investment recovery has on the bottom line. So effective investment recovery is essential to a successful demolition projects. Now, if you look at all these different commodities listed on this slide, they have varying degrees of value. And you have a cost, on recyclable equipment, you have a cost per ton in equipment and scrap. You have a cost per ton versus a credit per ton. And so, by looking at all this different type of material on your projects, if you've got Hastelloy, if your cost is $300 a ton to do the work, and you're getting $200 a ton credit for the scrap steel, then basically your cost is going to be $100 a ton. Now, if you've got a $300 a ton cost, and you've got copper at $5,000 a ton, then that's $4,700 a ton that can be applied against non-revenue producing tasks. So, look at the job as a sum of its components rather than just a scrap overall. And also look at the value of the materials as money, because that's what it is, and you need to spend it wisely. So this shows the impact that investment recovery has on the bottom line on a demolition project. Now, if you look at the two examples, scenario number one, basically a gross bid is all costs associated with satisfying the terms of the scope of work, including overhead and profit. Now, if you look at scenario number one, you have a gross bid of $1 million. You have an asset recovery credit of $100,000, so there wasn't much effort put into that. So the owner's cost to do the work was $900,000. Now, in the second one, basically the asset recovery effort yielded excellent results. You have a totally loaded gross bid of $1 million, and you have scrap credits of $1.1 million. So the owner was allowed to have the work done at a credit. So I can't say that's going to happen on every single project or even a lot of the projects, because you do have non-revenue producing tasks that are going to be costs, that there's ways to offset them, and we can discuss that later if you want. But those costs have to be incurred. But you can be creative to make sure that, and through value engineering, to make sure that the amount of salvage credit that you have on a project is going to be maximum, it's going to offset the cost, so you have to come up with the least amount of money out of pocket. Okay, bid comparison. As owners and contractors, there's a mutual benefit to submit bids in a manner that apples can be compared to apples. Now, I hope you folks can see this because it's a very important slide in regards to evaluating proposals and evaluating bids. Is probably the most important slide that I've ever put on the screen. Now, sometimes the apparent low bid is not the actual low bid. If you look at the two contractors here, and also too, backing up a little bit, I've had a lot of different contractors come to me and tell me that the bids weren't properly evaluated and that the company wasn't comparing apples to apples and they didn't get the job. Now, sometimes it's sour grapes, sometimes it's a valid complaint. I've had owners come up to me and say, yes, we selected the low bid and we end up paying $5 million in change orders. So that happens. So properly having the bid submitted in a way that you can compare apples to apples is a way to, number one, make sure you're choosing the right contractor and that the apparent low bid is the actual low bid. So in this particular case here, now bidder contractor number 2 appears to be the low bid. Before they will lose $5 million, they're going to come back to you for change orders if they made a mistake. Now, you can't really see it, and I apologize for that, but you will see it when you download it. But here's some examples. Contractor number 1 allowed for removing 15,000 tons of metal. Contractor number 2 only allowed for removing 5,000 tons of metal. Contractor number 1 allowed for $3 million in hazmat abatement. Contractor number 2 only allowed $1 million. Contractor number 1 allowed for removal of 150,000 linear feet of underground piping, while contractor number 2 allowed for the removal of 400,000 linear feet of underground piping. Contractor number 1 had 792 days, while contractor number 2 had 132 days. So who made a mistake and who got it right? Now, having third and fourth bidders or fifth bidders or sixth bidders, you don't want to get too many because then you really are looking for somebody to make a mistake, is a better way to fine-tune your bid bracket, and also get a better handle on the cost, but you still need to balance those bids. And to make sure that everybody's had a chance to review their numbers and make sure they know what they're getting into and that you feel comfortable with their bids, that they can do the job for the amount of money that they said they can do it for. So now, we've only got about 15 minutes, so we're going to take about a 5-minute breakout session. And so get everybody talk at the tables. If you're sitting by yourself, please get at the table with somebody else. And let's talk about what's worked for you, best practices, and what has not worked for you on demolition projects. And let's get back together in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, we spoke at our table about some of the best practices. And number one was we wanted to allow enough time to get through everything, have a detailed schedule we talked about, schedules time and money, and make sure we follow it. A lot of times by the time you award a contractor a project, and it gets going, the schedule is already compromised 4 months, and you have 2 months to do 6 months worth of work. We talked about doing potential turnkey solutions, whether you have a contractor do everything, the asbestos abatement, decommissioning, or do you separate the tasks out on the job? And we talked about and this is actually one of the best practices and key insights that we discussed, was having everybody together for a communication meeting in the morning or a JHA, and also have the field technicians, the operators, everybody doing work on the job, the managers, the project executive, be there in the morning to contribute to developing a JHA. And one of the worst practices we have were sometimes contractors go on site and they don't know who's handling the overall site safety. They know there's who's handling the whole site. Is it an active site or is it an orphan site? And there's no site safety policies that they didn't follow. What's more stringent, theirs or the site's overall safety procedures?
Now, I got started in this 1973, and I come back from the military, and I come back from Vietnam, and I basically said, well, I'm gonna get myself a job and get myself into college. And so they said, what do you know how to do? Well, I went straight out of high school, straight to Vietnam, so I know how to shoot and I know how to blow things up. And so I filled out 5 applications, and a week later, I got 5 phone calls back, and I said, this is a really sick world. I said, they're wanting me to do something. So anyway, I got into the demolition business, and I said, there's no way that I'm going to be able to have enough projects to sustain me till retirement. Well, I'm 67 now, and to tell you the truth, one of my mentors years ago when I first got started, he says, Mike, I'm telling you, everything you see is going to come down at some point or another. Gravity makes it want to come down. And now the goal is to make it come down safely and economically without getting anybody hurt or damaging anything. So with that, does anybody else have any other questions? We've got about 5 minutes. No questions? Well, folks, we'll give you your last 5 minutes of your day back, and thank you so much for participating in this. All the best. Thank you.